Online today. Task force meeting number 12. Next slide. All right, so we'll begin with introductions today. I'll start. Hans Navy, Minnesota Crucial Agency Manager in the Remediation Division. Can I start this?
Sure. I'm Kirk Yaffe, Assistant Commissioner at the Minnesota Pollution Affiliates.
Victoria Reinhardt, representing Ramsey County.
Dave Magnuson, Dakota County Waste Regulations.
And Pat Ski, Pat Council.
David Bell, Minnesota Department of Health.
Caleb Johnson, Washington County Department of Public Health and Environment.
Dan Scotland, Special Area Hydrologist with
Melanie McMahon, Interim Director of the Department of Planning and Economic Development, City of St. Paul.
Morning, everybody. Nathan Waller, I'm a project manager branch chief with the St. Paul District Army Corps of Engineers.
We have the task force, and also behind the scenes, there's a task force team that does all the supportive work. Maybe we'll introduce the folks that are in the room, the task force team.
Sarah Vandenberg, with Santa Associates.
And I'm Megan Ryan with Santa Associates as well.
I'm Corinne Stromler with FCA.
All right, let's keep going. Oh, yeah, sorry. Folk, members of the public, you want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Ron Cockrell from the neighborhood. Stephen Mickelson with MVCA, advisor in the closed landfill program.
Tammy Anderson, Pollution Control Agency, Mediation Division Director.
Right, next slide. We're through the introductions. This is our plan for today.
Jimmy Francis is online.
Oh, sorry.
St. Paul.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Just want to let you know I'm here. Sorry, my day job got in the way here, so I can't be in person. I appreciate this technology.
Appreciate it very much. It's our plan for today. We'll talk about the timeline for the few meetings that we have. We're getting very near the end. Very few meetings left and still some important work to do. We'll talk about what the timeline looks like and specifically what the timeline for the final report looks like. I'll go over that in detail with you with dates and what we're proposing for next steps. I want to share about stakeholder conversation that we had, and I'll also share about additional stakeholder conversations we would like to have. Many of those will involve one or more of your organizations. We'll talk more about that. I have proposed recommendations to go through. We took as best we could what we were hearing from you all and formulated those into some proposed recommendations. So we'll walk through those. Then we'll do a 15-minute break. We'll come back to public comment, chance to discuss the recommendations, and then we'll have a chance for final wrap up at the end, and that will be our time today. Right. Let's see if that works for everyone if we do that. Fine. Our way to move
Yes.
In August, we focused on funding options. We started to talk about moving towards recommendations by asking you all what you thought about what were priorities for you, if you had feedback specifically about the recommendations for remediation and restoration. That's primarily the source for the recommendations. For today, for the October meeting, the plan is to talk about, really focus on draft recommendations. And that leaves us with 2 meetings left. The December meeting where we would look at the final report and comments. And then the January meeting hopefully is a very simple meeting where we're doing a final report. We'll see if it works out that way. This is the plan.
Supposed to be 26.
2026. Very good.
Otherwise, we're done.
All right, so the details are important here. So let's go to the details. Next slide.
Letting me advance.
Okay. Our plan is to get you all a draft report by November 10th. And we are, our general request would be 2-week turnaround on the review if that's possible. If we're able to do that, we would get comments back from you November 24th. And then the team would do a reviewing, a consolidating, making edits, and then we would meet on the comments on December 2nd. We're thinking primarily to December 2nd is talking about where there were areas of agreement in the comments, and also talking about where the comments took us down two different roads. If there are any comments like that, trying to resolve those together. So we're not picturing we would go through every comment line by line. We're going to talk about themes. After that, after the meeting, we would do another draft. We would send you another draft on December 16th. There'd be a little longer review period given this time of year, and we would hope to get comments back by January 6th. Then our team would be doing more work, doing a lot of work between January 6th and January 9th to get a final draft. We would send it out and talk about the final draft on January 13th. Okay, thoughts, feelings, reflections about the schedule. This is aggressive, achievable, what people think.
You'll send this back out so we can.
We will definitely send this out to you after the meeting. I know you're seeing this for the first time, maybe some time to process. This is what we're coming up with. And really the reason for this is the report's due February 15th, but there's a whole agency process on a legislative report. We need to allow time for that. And also if there are unforeseen things, we won't have time at the end. So we're adding a little prep stress to task force team, but we're hoping to save that in the back end by having some time at the end to account for things we didn't plan.
Seems reasonable to me.
Right. Share about stakeholder conversation. We had a follow-up meeting about aviation issues. We had previous meetings with USDA. Their role is about birds around airports. I guess is a simple way to say it. That's where they fit in. There's also FAA. And there's also the Metropolitan Airports Commission. We met with them a couple of times. We had an additional meeting. We brought in MnDOT Aviation Group. We had a large meeting with all of us together. I'll say it was a very good and productive meeting to meet with the stakeholder group. And coming out of that meeting, we're thinking we need to do more of this in pre-design stage. It was really helpful. On some of them, we're putting them in a difficult spot, wanting kind of detailed answers. We're not bringing them detailed information. So, but they were very willing to work with us on that, knowing that we're in this early stage. So the additional part is that we have this time was there's some specific zoning requirements we got from MnDOT that we weren't fully aware of before. We knew there were probably some that we didn't have the details. The three main issues are the same issues I've shared before. Wildlife considerations, construction, after construction, particularly if there's a wetland. We were learning, as you may guess, not all wetlands are equal depending on attracting wildlife. Some do more than others. These are important details we would need to work through in the design phase. What is a final wetland going to look like? Bird populations, and also the height. In the dig and line scenario, we're building a new landfill. There's concerns about the height. Any cranes are used. There are also concerns about construction. So we asked fairly directly, are there any of these remediation options that are a no-go at this point for you, based on what you know now? They said they're all workable, but they all have concerns. There's all concerns on all of them that we would need to work through in the design stage. Coming out of that meeting, we said we need to do this again with other issues and concerns. It would be helpful as much as we can to get more information on before we enter a design phase. There's aviation issues. We've got a good head start on that. There's going to be wetland issues. There's going to be flood issues. There'll be infrastructure issues. There will be building and zoning issues. Hoping to, in the future, have meetings like we had in the aviation issue with other regulatory authorities in these areas. I don't have any specifics yet, but that is our plan, is to start to schedule those. We'll probably be focused on the final report for a little while, but when there is time opening up, but before we move really deep into a design, we would do some of these stakeholders.
This is an issue or consideration for what we want to do. But
one of my biggest concerns is that we're not gonna have the issue of funding really outlined, because we can put together the most beautiful plan in the world. And based on, what we think is the right thing to do. But we need to take into consideration, doesn't mean anything unless we can get it. So I don't know that it fits here, because you're talking about going out to get public comment on it. But it's kind of the elephant in the room. So I don't want us to lose sight of that, because I don't want all of this work. And if we don't do our very best to address that, and I know that that's going to be at the state and federal level, primarily as far as the funding gets involved in how that works. But it's a huge issue.
Yes. There were some questions in the stakeholder meeting about that. I think so they're also recognizing what you're saying.
I guess I would, it's a little bit different than the rest of the things up there. I think I'd add it to the list so that it's very clear that we have considered.
Need a funding plan. Understand? All right, should we keep going? Okay. Yeah, proposed recommendation. So just a couple slides, seen this before, just to refresh all of us. 4 options on the table for remediation, targeted waste relocation filter. This is the lower cost option. Removing a small amount of waste where it's closest to water, installing a filtering material. New cover, we would install a new modern cover on the landfill. There would be no trees. There would be wonderful pollinator habitat. There would be an impermeable cover. There would be no liner. And the same issue that's going on now would continue to happen. There would be, every time there's a flood, there'd be intrusion of flood water from below, no liner. Dig and haul with no backfill. Things I like would get larger. We'd have to have some mindful and intentional design on what kind of wetland is being restored there. We'd remove all the waste from the site and dispose of it at a permanent landfill and not do any backfilling. And we have the dig and line option, which is build a new modern landfill at the facilities with all the important landfill systems. 4 options. Paired with this are options for reuse, future reuse. Different kinds of reuse, different kinds of recreational uses, passive and active. Future use is a natural area, and commercial industrial uses, as there are already some commercial industrial uses in the neighborhood. Just reviewing here. Getting into the restoration options. A couple things before we go through this. There's numbers on these. As we did this as a team, I didn't put numbers on because I didn't want to rank them. The discussion got really hard because when we talked about it, we didn't know what we were referring to. So the numbers don't imply any kind of hierarchy, but this will help with the discussion. Also, as you'll see that there may be some areas where these things don't actually line up at this point. There's a little bit of conflict in a few places between these. I think that's fine and good. We're at the beginning stage of the process. So this is just to start a recommendations discussion, things that we're proposing for discussion. I think easiest if I just read through them. There's going to be 10 remediation ones and a smaller number of restoration ones. These are our starting point. Number 1, the existence of a large volume of uncontained waste directly adjacent to Battle Creek and Pigs Eye Lake is a risk to the environment. The waste should not remain in place as it currently is. We'll just go through all of them. We can come back. Second one, remediation and restoration efforts should focus on options that best prioritize protectiveness of local communities, wildlife, and natural habitat, and improve water quality while remaining feasible and financially achievable. Remediation and restoration action should be consistent with existing planning work, including work by the City of St. Paul and Great River Passage. Mediation and restoration options pursued should be implemented in a way that addresses aviation concerns related to the St. Paul downtown airport. Environmental remediation should place greater priority on long-term environmental protection over achieving the lowest possible cost. Preferred remediations options are the dig and haul, the dig and line options. Excavating all the waste and sending it to existing metro landfills would greatly impact the remaining landfill capacity for the metro area. If dig and haul is implemented, the final disposal locations should not be existing metro area landfills. Future use of the site should include safe and accessible natural area for passive recreation, such as walking trails and wildlife observation. The environmental cleanup and restoration plan should allow for future expansion of the Metropolitan Water Resource Recovery Facility and the Pigs Eyewood Recycling Center. Both facilities serve a public purpose and have an environmental benefit. The MPCA should complete a feasibility study of the remediation options presented to the task force, prioritizing the dig and haul and the dig and line. I'll stop here before we go to the funding options to see if there's any initial things to come. We'll definitely come back and go through these line by line.
At what point, there's other things that I'd like to add to this list. Is this appropriate time for that? Okay. Well, one of the things that I have talked about in the past, and by the way, I have discussed these with Commissioner, the chair of the board, Commissioner Ortega, Commissioner Zhang, and Commissioner Miller, and the county manager. So they clearly understand what is being considered here. One of the concerns in digging something up like that is you don't know what you're going to find. And so making sure that it is clearly stated that you're going to remediate the environmental and safety risks of digging it up. It's kind of there, but it's not explicitly stated. And the other part of it, and I think this is really important because it will be brought up by legislators and funding partners, I would believe, is that if we do the dig and haul, which I think is where we're heading, but we'll see. The contents that you're hauling away, that I know it has been said that they would be basically cleaned up so that we're not just moving the problem to some other location. And so I think actually, again, explicitly stating that it will be cleaned up, remediated, so that when it gets to wherever it's going, they don't have the same problem. I don't know what the right words for that are, but I think you know what I'm saying. It's okay, clean it up, and then you can haul it someplace else.
Yeah. I think what that would look like is the receiving facility would have requirements that have us meet. Yeah, so we would need to do some characterization of the waste. They would say, we're not taking this waste until you tell us what it is. We have to tell them what it is. There are things that, depending on the facility, they may not take. This is mostly going to be hazardous waste. So those need to go to a different facility. So in terms of cleanup, if we're hauling waste off the site, it's really looking like probably fairly coarse sorting. Is this hazardous materials that are recoverable? Is this obviously recyclable material like a car body? That's probably what the extent of it would be.
Okay, so it wouldn't be cleanup per se, it would be where it would go.
It would be mostly sorting for where it would go.
So when it's going someplace else, I guess I'm having trouble figuring out how that would work from an environmental standpoint.
The big issue is more about the characteristics of the facility, as Hans is mentioning. The risk here is large part built on is that there is no containment system. Where it goes into the future, there will be containment. So the risk of the materials today are because it has free access to ground. Water can run through it and other pieces. That risk pathway disappears if it isn't in the case landfill or is incinerated. So part of the risk is addressed by not going to, the material itself still has the same risk characteristics within it. It's just put in a place which doesn't allow for those pathways. Because we wouldn't be able to say destroy PFAS necessarily on the site and then transport the waste someplace else. But we could, as Hans said, the hazardous waste stuff would go to a much more restrictive and protective system, would not end up in an MSW landfill. In here, it would have to go to hazardous waste landfill, and then the stuff that looks like MSW could go into an MSW landfill here.
Well, again, I would like to see that there's some mention of where it would go, because otherwise, and how it would be dealt with, so that it's not just moving the problem someplace else. And it is moving the problem someplace else, but it's a problem that they're ready to address, is what you're saying.
It's a better place.
So I would like, but I think it's important that both of those things are stated.
Initial things before we move to mediation funding. Is there the proposed funding options discussion? No one funding source can provide the needed funding for environmental remediation, so a combination of various funding sources will be required. New revenue source should be created to fund the remediation of dumps. Federal funding should be pursued. Adjustments to the Mississippi River Restoration and Resilience Initiative or creation of a structure like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative are recommended. Public-private partnership should be considered on remediation efforts. Private parties, waste haulers and industries who contribute waste to the facility. In a public-private partnership, these facilities, they would contribute funding. Public entities would contribute through appropriations or in-kind services. State could utilize bonding, MILCAT, or new revenue to provide funding. Patchwork of funding from many different places. The potential responsible parties for the Pig's Eye dump, the full and complete list of that would include most metro area waste generators when the dump is operating. Scope of potential responsibilities is vast, including waste haulers, businesses, nonprofits, local governments in much of the metro area. Given the expansive list of potential responsible parties, a fee should be assessed on all metro area waste disposal, cover remediation expenses for Pig's Eye and similar dumps. The final one is really focused on restoration efforts. Should pursue other federal and state sources of funding for restoration efforts. Examples are LCCMR, Lessard Sam's, Outdoor Heritage.
Any idea how many dumps there are?
There are 1,800 that we know of, and that is a work that MPCA and I think Department of Health helped us a while back to. But I think you could tailor not all of these necessarily actions, but it is an Arlingo dump is something that had been permitted beforehand versus a landfill, and there are, for most cases, landfills, there are systems in place, the closed landfill program or they're under an operating permit of a facility today and they have to be addressed that way. Dumps don't. And that's kind of our technical lingo on the difference between the different types of online landfills.
And for Pig's Eye, when was the last year that it was in operation?
72.
72? And the other dumps, I assume they're not being used anymore, or maybe that's the wrong assumption.
No, it is, all dumps would be closed. Anything that would be waste disposal today would be permitted and have a landfill, designated a landfill because it's not.
Are things that were dumps that aren't permanent? Components to them still? Most of them. Start as dump.
Yes, probably. Not much greenfield landfill.
I grew up in Hastings, and I remember the dump. So,
Hans, regarding maybe number 3, I think on the prior slide. Oh, sorry, 4. Apologies. So that last sentence, the state could utilize bond, MILCAT, or new revenue to provide funding, I guess just a call out of, or potentially redirect existing revenue such as solid waste management tax that goes to other purposes besides solid waste. Not those words, but just calling out there's existing revenue that's not getting appropriated to solid waste management purposes. That could be a source for this as well.
Problem with that is that takes away from Scoreland.
Or other state agencies that benefit from I think there's a large portion of the solid waste management tax that goes to other state agencies, not pollution control programs. And I don't want to make the Pig's Eye landfill their problem, but if we're going to see new revenue sources.
I think there's a lot of push by the counties to get all of that, all this tax.
More of it.
Yeah. Be cautious.
and I think that's true, but the biggest issue that we have is that well over half that is going to things that have nothing to do with solid waste. And so maybe it's, yeah, we'd have to figure that out, but clearly at least having it have something to do with solid waste rather than education or whatever they want to use now, which is all good things. But it was specifically a solid waste tax, which would indicate it would go solid waste issues.
And that tax rate could also be a modulator to grow revenue for this purpose rather than a separate line item or fund source.
But it should, I think, the biggest thing is that it should be identified as this is what this money is going to be used for.
Agreed.
Real high level, do folks feel like we listened well? The past conversation, past meetings and coming up with these, or are we really need to make some major course corrections?
Feel like it's a good synthesis.
There wasn't one that said we're doing the dig and haul, we're doing the dig and line. Maybe hopefully in the discussion we'll get to is that where one thing, the need, also a recommendation, a feasibility study is needed. So it feels like generally on track.
Just one question on the feasibility study. I mean, I think we all agree, talking last few meetings about data gaps and you're making a decision without all the info. I mean, does the PCA currently have funding to do a feasibility study, or is that something that you would want to consider putting in this report?
It's the bill gap.
So that's a done deal.
We have funding for it.
Okay.
What kind of feasibility study is that? It could be expensive if you can't have access to your money.
Yeah, this is a discussion we're having with, so there's multiple teams in this project. There's the Pig's Eye Task Force supporting team behind the scenes, and we have a separate remediation division team that works on the Pig's Eye dump. And we'll need to blend these two teams together. And we're at the point of doing that right now. So it's also a Superfund site. So there's a Superfund feasibility study process, which that process does not account for input task force. So we'll need to make some adjustments to that. The scope of what's included, we talked about remediation. It's what needs cleanup, well, the waste and the sediment and the groundwater and offsite sources. That is a very large feasibility study. I'm not going to recommend we take that on as the first step. I recommend we take on what we take on as a task force as the first step, which is the waste. So it'll be a focused feasibility study, bringing in the task force recommendations. So Superfund, there are specified criteria we use to evaluate different options. We would add to that task force criteria. My proposal would be we scope it around the waste, deal with the waste as the first step. But make it, I think, a little more doable. But we would also want to be clear in that there's more. This is not all of it. This is only the first step in the feasibility study. There's still going to be sediment, groundwater, offsite sources.
So beyond the boundary of if there's a 2 ton limit, say, that seems like it would have the most impact on things around. Sounds like this feasibility is about in the boundaries of that or within where the waste is going to be. I'm concerned, and like Mac, about beyond that boundary impacts to that other. If we found something that could be mitigated, then the best plan in the world isn't doable. So somehow we have to make sure if there's a deal breaker in there that we didn't spot, like water of that wetland area, is a significant thing. I'm saying I know what the answer would be, or even if it would be a risk, but identifying those red flags up front is part of that feasibility.
Yes. My preference would be we even identify those before the feasibility study, in those stakeholder conversations. We have like ideas where some of them are, but we need to get into more detail on it. Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think another argument for just focusing on the waste first is it would be sad if we focused on the groundwater first and then focused on the waste and realized by containing the waste first, it had an impact on the groundwater. So control the source first, see what it does, and then see what additional things need clean. Another good argument for why that's
The conversation on feasibility of waste would also look at where it goes. So it would have to consider, as you were mentioning, as we sort and filter stuff, it's going to the correct spot, and are those places acceptable for, so that is going to have that impact, which I hear is very important to a number of the task force members. That will be included in this feasibility study that's focused on.
I guess maybe I'll split it to 2 things. There's feasibility of remediation. And then there's the feasibility of having something there, whatever that is. They're separate. Because if it was just nothing around it, you could remediate, that wouldn't affect anything else. There are many things around it. And if the feasibility of the remediation work and creating something new there is paid for by MilCap, how do you pay for the other part? Once you say, okay, this looks like it would work, does it fit the risks that it brings? We don't know yet. That's what feasibility is for. How do you pay for that second part that comes?
They'll use MilCap. I would say, you're talking about 2 things: feasibility of construction operation, and feasibility of permitting. This is what I'm getting this right?
Well, what if I'll make something up. What if it depressed the land because it's really heavy? I have no idea. And it cracked the flood wall at Metro land, and we now have 10 million. No idea, but we want to make sure that can never happen. And I have no idea how to even look at that.
So feasibility plan would look at if we took actions on the waste. I mean, because we're going to look at the feasibility plan would, if we built a digging lot in a certain height, the feasibility study would have to talk about its impact to the flight or the airport. And so I think it's those type of impacts that are still to the waste. I think for us in the Superfund, there are all different operating units. So like the sediment that has already flown into Big's Eye Lake, That's gonna have to be addressed, but that could be a totally separate project. I think most of what we've been talking about is gonna be captured under the feasibility study that Hans is talking about. There are just lingering impacts at the site that may need more. For instance, if we dig it up, we may still have to monitor the groundwater. Maybe we need to run a pump tree in addition. That might be outside the conversation. The sediment at the toe where Battle Creek comes in, we've already had conversations that that's probably gonna need some mitigation. But we don't want stuff to keep flowing in there and have to do it again, so. Fix the source, then we'll figure out the dig out of the. I think it'll capture some of those things you talked about. Because it'll impacts of the action of the remediation and restoration will be addressed. It's more, there's just different components of the solution that.
Yeah, and I'm just hoping there's funding for all of the analysis. We don't stop at some point, look at something.
Not seeing a funding barrier for feasibility study.
Does feasibility of the waste, does that include a more deep characterization of the waste on site, or is that more, I don't know, monitoring more sediments and choosing a few things that
Sometimes feasibility studies, they highlight data gaps. You need to fill before you can go to design. This would be one of them. Better understanding of the waste characteristics, what's depth of volume. Right now, we would need additional data before we could do a detailed design, or before we could get to 100% design. I should say we could probably start.
so some of that would be taking place during a feasibility.
Probably afterwards, actually. Well, let me say that. I'd say the full extent of that afterwards. Some of what's going on right now. You've got
Yeah.
a remediation team that's working and collecting data, and so it would be both.
So we're talking about funding. One thing to, if you don't have a new revenue source. And I think that goes into number 5, where you talk about having, or basically having something like Melcat for dumps. Which kind of sound like they're the same thing, but they're not. But whenever you're using current funding, somebody's going to get upset because it's being used and we don't have enough of it anyway for even Melcat. So adding a new item to that list of what's going to be funded or how it's going to fund this, there's going to be folks that are going to be really upset because like, wait, we've been waiting to get this cleaned up.
Very sensitive. Okay.
Yeah, and so if you put, I don't know that we want to specifically call that out. Because it's going to have push and pull. And again, none of this means anything if we don't get it. So I think that would probably leave that out. Bonding, that's new.
Happens less it's funded. This is a point of there's a little conflict in the recommendations. One of them saying funding's not the highest priority. The other one saying that it's got to be fundable. Otherwise, nothing happens. So,
Well, I don't know that it was funding per se as much as it was the cost,
cost.
which, I mean, we all know that that's going to be the biggest barrier. And so I don't know that it's in conflict with that, but it's not pointing in a direction saying, why don't you use that? And to me, Melcat listing it there means that.
Didn't the legislature put this example into Melcat?
It's in Melcat.
So
Oh, this one is.
it's already in there, so it's hard
Oh.
to take it.
Oh, okay, sorry. I forgot that.
We weren't happy about it.
Okay. Okay, so it's a given then. So I mean, it's in there already, then it's eligible.
And as part of, we're getting into the nuance of some of this in number 7 on the agenda, right?
Yes.
Okay. I had thoughts and everything. on the specifics, but I can get to that when we get to that, the agenda.
Great.
Okay.
So our thoughts are, we went through all this as slides and getting into the nuance. We'll switch formats. We'll have a document. You could actually say, I want to change this, or I want to change this, or I want to this thing. We'll have a chance to do that kind of work together.
I think if there are new concepts like this first one, Victoria, you talked about addressing the safety risk during the construction of the neighborhoods and workers. I mean, that's a new concept. So we would like those things out on the table. We can kind of maybe draft those now and during the break to put them up on the street. So the new concepts, wordsmith that we could do, but it would be good to just other thoughts too, people can think about on the break, and then we're going to have public comment to as Hans mentioned, when then we get into the wordsmith one.
On the schedule, we had a 9:45 to 10 a.m. break. Before we do that, you need comments. As Kirk was talking about, things that are on the table that shouldn't be, or places where you think we're way off. All right, well, let's go to break until 10 a.m. We'll come back and do public comment at 10 a.m. and we'll have the recommendation. Any public comment do we have from folks in the room?
Good morning. My name is Ron Cockrell. I live in the area and been following the project literally for decades. Couple things. Representing, I guess, as a homeowner, landowner, and guilty party of putting stuff into dumps. I appreciate the fact that as we're moving forward, and I think it's a valid funding source, is to charge those that live in the different counties that put garbage into the dump. Also, I think it's important that you call out, identify, and get their participation, however you call it, for the private parties that make money dumping there. And within that fund, if it's a sovereign fund or however it's set up, I think it's a good thing. Appreciate that piece of it, because if you're looking to tax me additional, I want to know everyone that was responsible for creating the dump in some way is being held accountable. I think that'll make any kind of funding move forward. As long as everyone's involved in it, then we should all have a piece of the fix. So that looks good to me. My concern is, and has been, is all of this work that we're doing, and I feel that you're handing in a C+ paper if you're not going to take care of the fact that the creeks are going to come down and scour all of the material that's in Pigside Dump, both Pigside Dump and the fish hatchery site. So you're not going to be able to clean one without addressing the bigger picture. So in my sense, I'm thinking St. Paul, you're thinking too small. You got to make the problem bigger in order to fix it all. If you're going in and just doing the one site downstream of everything else, then you're not going to fix anything. Looking at the two concepts as to taking it all, making it all go away and getting out of there and opening up the sites for repurposing and or bringing it back to what it used to be, whatever state that was in, it's going to cost quite a bit. Leaving a pile in the middle of that site pretty much breaks down the argument that we should do something about it. We're just going to take it and churn it up and leave it there for $500 million. I don't think anyone can buy into that. Is there another option to move it within the site? I kind of believe that if you move the material onto the other Superfund site, the fish hatchery site, which is northeast of the rails, that area, all of that area all floods into one pipe and then down into the Mississippi. So at that one pipe, we can take care of all of the runoff and control it and filter it. Meanwhile, we can process everything on site. St. Paul's responsible for it. St. Paul fixes it with the funding from everyone that's being held accountable for the process. But if the science says we got to move it, show me the science. Other than I feel bad that my parents dumped everything there. If the science is there saying we got to get rid of it because of all of these checkpoints, then it should be an easy argument that we move ahead on it because everyone's being held accountable for it. We got a plan to fix it and we're getting the highest and best use out of it if, in my mind, if we move it away from the water treatment center. So that portion can be repurposed however. But honestly, we got to get rid of all of it or leave it all alone, is my mind. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
We talked a little bit, we did look at the idea of potentially moving and combining pig's eye waste, fish hatchery, onto the fish hatchery property, kind of talk about why that didn't move forward a little bit, just at a very high level, because we did, it was a very good comment, and there was work done by the remediation on that.
Yeah, it's essentially a dig in, you would be implementing both dig and haul and dig and rods. We haul it and then build a new landfill at the fish hatchery site. Really has to do with how suitable that fish hatchery site is. I know volume is one issue, also the existing length that's there and the properties that are around it. So I think what you're saying is it's way better to have not multiple dumps, particularly if there's some benefit to consolidation. We've done this in other facilities that are in the coastline. We've consolidated smaller things into one thing. It gets down to what is the best location to do the consolidation. It looks like engineering wise, the fish hatcheries have been very challenged to do it there because of volume and because of the water that's directly adjacent. But the idea has merit, and certainly we've done that before. When we're moving waste, we always look at consolidate. Is there an opportunity to consolidate? It just comes down to the details of where.
Thank you.
Yes. Other public comment, folks in the room. We'll move to maybe start with, are there anything in the chat?
During the break, Jimmy and Francis had just mentioned that, once digging starts, they find barrels of solvent connected to Ford or West Publishing, the project have the ability to go to them for compensation support.
Could you read that again?
Yes. Jimmy, this is from Jimmy Francis, said, once digging starts and they find barrels of solvent connected to Ford or West Publishing, wouldn't the project have the ability to go after them for compensation?
So it's a Superfund site. We have authority to pursue responsible parties. The way the law is set up, we can just pursue one. We don't have to pursue all of them, but we would need to be able to have a case that they were the responsible party. And I suspect it's rare that for large liability cases, the responsible party comes along willingly from our first ask. Sometimes we get there in the end, but it's rare that happens in the first ask. So that often is a delay, an extra cost, which is complicated. It often complicates when we're in the field doing the work. So often what happens is when we encounter these things, we don't hold the construction project, but we do the work, we tally our costs, and we go for reimbursement after the fact. Often what happens.
I think one of the other complicating factors is, while we could name responsible parties, we can't prevent responsible parties from naming others and doing that under joint and several liability. And this is what we saw in the late 80s, early 90s, was landfills and Superfund being used, the northern suburbs, is we could go after the top 15. They then sent letters saying, hey, we know you also disposed here because public records having that information, and say, now you need to pay. And that's where it all started to expand beyond what the state or the federal government did. So that's one of the complicating factors and why the closed landfill program was created, is because there was a lot of legal and administrative paperwork and fighting going on, and not no. So that's where the closed landfill program came along with the concept of everyone is a responsible party. Societal problem, society created it, the state would then fix it. So we could, but we can't. We could go after a select number of RPs, but we can't contain that. The system can expand that.
But it's a very potent statute and has side effects. Anything else in the chat? To any public comment from folks that are joining us online today? last time I didn't do the greatest job of inviting people in because I said, just say your comment, but they need to be unmuted to do that. So we'd ask that you raise your hand and we will give you access to speak. If you have a comment.
You have another comment that says, have Native American representatives provided any comment or opinion on the proposed cleanup options?
We met with 2 different tribal nations. We've had specific meetings with Prairie Island Indian community. Also, we've met with the Walk on TV as well. Specific comment.
We reached out to others too. The agency has a list of tribal nations that said what areas of the state they're interested in when they occur. I believe we reached out to those. Not all tribal nations necessarily will select Ramsey or St. Paul as an area. Sometimes they will not respond. That's not because we didn't reach out to them. They've just chosen not to. The bandwidth or other reasons. Not to.
So online, if you'd like to, please raise your hand and we'll space for you to do that. All right, seeing no public comment from folks that are joining us online. Is there additional public comment from folks in the room?
I'm sorry, one procedural question I guess I actually had regarding the public access. Is it possible that after today's video can be available today or in the next day or two? Because at this point, we had an August that's available now. And we're kind of running down to just weeks. So there's some way that the public can have availability to this conversation saying, here is the horse that we're putting into the arena. And that way, there's a little more opportunity for folks to hear from people. That's an option.
Yeah, I do hear that. The request is for a much quicker turnaround on getting the materials posted online. That's a valid point that you're making, as the schedule is speeding up.
Yeah, but they're not going to hear about it until after December, and then it's, yeah.
I understand that. Last call for public comment or more today. Let's move on to recommendations. Getting in the details. I was thinking we'd go through this line by line. We'll probably switch presentation formats around editing in the presentation separate document. We would go through this recommendation and talk about make edits and perhaps add additional things.
Not all of them need to move forward. Some are more detailed versions of things that are higher up. And so they're there, so the task force has the choice. How deep do you want to go on some topics versus how high level on pieces? So we don't necessarily assume all of these will necessarily.
Selfish matter of personal interest. Is there any chance we could start with the funding recommendations first and then go to the remediation aspiration? Don't have to, but I've got to head out at 11 and I have more thoughts on those funding ones. I just wanted to make sure I had a chance to express those.
Start with funding.
Thank you. Thank you.
Logistically, are we set to, are we ready to begin?
Yes, I'm going to stop sharing.
This is also being recorded from the same teacher. Okay, funding recommendations. Start with the first one. No one funding source is able to provide the needed funding for environmental remediation, so a combination of various funding sources will be required. Keep, discard, modify, thoughts about it, comments about it.
Melanie.
Easy one to
I mean,
say.
it might need to including new revenue sources as well. I feel like when we talked about even just knowing
New and-
existing sources was not necessarily gonna be enough. That seemed like a very difficult thing. And that got us into discussing these potential new revenue sources as well. So
Like various new and or existing.
this just seems like our general
Yeah.
thesis for this whole discussion.
Would change the OR to and. Can't imagine we do this for all the existing.
Yeah, that's what I meant was, yep.
Funding sources would be needed. More on this one. And 2 is new revenue source should be created to fund remediation of debt.
That's what I'm wondering, and to your point, Kirk, about there's what, 1,800, however many dumps that new revenue source should be created to fund the remediation of Pig's Eye. I mean, it is the Pig's Eye task force, right? And so if we were to talk about dumps, I think that's a whole other, for all of the dumps that's, yeah, and so for Pig's Eye. That now covered. It is.
Is there enough difference between 1 and 2 where they are separate things?
I think we could add Pig's Eye into number 1 and
Yes.
get rid of number 2. Yes.
So could you reiterate the idea behind funding source breakdowns in general? Talk about that. Is there?
There's a couple possible that have been brought up in here, and some of them are come up later. For instance, number 3 talks about creating new federal programs and funding potential is one option. There are other ones here too. 5 gets into more detail of one way to do it, which is creating for current waste generation or disposal of beyond it that would go towards this. That could be one that's more detailed. You could scale that back or leave it that detailed. So I think those are 2 examples. The question is, how much does the task force want to get into it? They just want to say new funding sources need to be created or give some ideas on it, get very specific in what those funding sources could look like in terms of how they would actually be.
I'll just say generally, my 2 cents, which are, and as we're going to continue to go through, but I would like to see 4 and 5 removed, and the reason being is identifying, entities, responsibility, et cetera. As we've discussed, there's existing law that covers responsible parties, the process, et cetera, to go through that. I don't think that we need to sort of call out, reiterate, identify, et cetera, that. And I think holistically, what I've heard is continuously as part of the conversation is essentially no one funding source is adequate. We're going to need new sources, and we should look to state and federal resources for that. And to me, 1, 2, and 3, and combining 6 in there really address holistically what we've been discussing.
Get down to really one general funding recommendation.
To me, yeah, it's just sort of lining up those 3 things. No current funding source is adequate. We're going to need new sources, and we need to look for state and federal funding. That's holistically, at least what I've been hearing. And I think the more we get into potential, Kurt, to your point, details of trying to identify kind of like this particular one or that particular one, I think a lot of that's the legislative process and what the legislature will do, but really coming in very clear and direct of we're going to need new sources and existing sources, and we're going to need state and federal partnerships to get it done. To me, that seems very clear-cut, straightforward for a recommendation, and to try and get into, like I said, naming specific things. And maybe it could be for example, and there could be a, not comprehensive, but for example, some of these sources, something similar to these sources on the federal level. That's just holistically my thoughts when I went through all of these. I was like, we can get rid of 4 and 5, 5 and 6, 1, 2, and 3, you know. We don't need number 2 now. Add that into 1.
Yes.
And specific to Pig's Eye too is better there, right? Instead of
Well,
like
we
dumpster.
added Pig's Eye to number 1.
Right, but yeah. Components together specific to Pig's Eye.
Sounds like you're worried about the scope creep outside of just for the Pigs Eye Dump Task Force. So while I fully support funding.
Yeah.
Other dumps. Not sure that.
Would take off the table opportunities for consolidation. Depending on where that's chosen, it would provide containment on the scope, but it would not allow for any opportunity for consolidation.
Well, I think it could though, because if the consolidated funds addressed Pig's Eye as an eligible use, then it addresses, I think, our recommendation. Because Pig's Eye would be an eligible use in that.
Pig's Eye project, and the project would say it would be advantageous to include this little deposit, this little deposit. That's still a Pig's Eye project. Still.
The other route, a counter argument. So like if we're funding, like if the advantage is calling for a fund for the remediation of dumps statewide, is that it's making it more of a state issue rather than just a local side issue. Going that, you know,
Maybe that and specifying which Pig's Eye would be ineligible.
I think that would be eligible, yeah. So.
I don't disagree with that, but again, going back to the fact that Pig's Eye landfill dump task force. Because I would think that if you had somebody from another legislator from another area that had a dump and they'd say, well, what about us? Okay, well then, you know, as long as you deal with Pig's Eye, they could expand the legislation in that way. But it wouldn't be necessarily a recommendation from us because that would be asking them to do even this ask for Pig's Eye dump is huge. If we put in there all the other dumps, it makes it even more difficult. Even though it's a good idea.
Is there consensus on eliminating just the Pig's Eye and combining funding recommendation 1 and 2?
Maybe just a little bit on the idea of 4 and 5 going away. There are just countless reports from agencies and groups that say new funding sources. It's white noise to the legislature. And how does that, the folks move it forward? We could say that, but that's just going to be, well, there's no funds available. And that's where we're not doing it. So if we think this is important enough that maybe there needs to be a new revenue stream on the state level, that might be good for this task force to help move it. Or, you know, how does it move later for groups to coalesce when it does get to the legislature funding phase? That how are those groups coming up with those ideas? That's more my thought is because at number 3, we're very specific. We're going to create a new program that is like this or handles this way. It gives us direction. That means for us to go work with the congressional representation, whether it's just us or a subset of this group here, to be able to do that. On the state level, just new funding is vague, has its benefits, has its negatives.
I guess the concern about getting to the prescription to the legislature. So I think, well, for example, on 4 and 5, I would just take, actually on 3, 4, and 5. Recommendation is federal funding should be pursued. We really have to get into Because the fact of the matter is the MRRI was based on the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. And that's where they took the model. So if the recommendation is federal funding should be pursued, in number 4, public partner should be considered, you know what I'm talking about, and private haulers included. The last sentence in each of 3, 4, and 5 are giving ideas on what could happen, but I think I would really be careful about not including public-private partnerships. So, and to say public entities could fund or contribute through, that's not a recommendation. Recommendation is that they should be pursued. So I would take the last sentence off of 3, 4, and 5. But I'd leave the fact that we're not just, we say there's not one funding source or one entity that's responsible. We need to make sure that there's at least a list of several folks that are responsible. We need to pursue.
So you're saying to keep 4, but remove like the last sentence?
Yes, and 5 the same way.
And I probably argue the opposite for that, just on the number 5 again, potential responsible parties are covered under existing law. And that's something
Now
that,
then to say as covered by under existing law, something, because otherwise if we're silent totally on that, it appears that it's just. So it can state that it is under existing law, whatever it is. Somehow, I think we need to call it out that others are responsible. Just because it's already covered doesn't mean that we don't say, hey, make sure you pursue that. It is covered.
and just to be completely transparent, right, from the city perspective, when you look at number 4 on the public entities could fund or contribute through tax appropriations in kind. Me, if that is part of the, recommendation to the legislature, it's essentially telling the legislature, you should raise taxes on St. Paul residents, Ramsey County residents, to fund Pig-Eye specifically. And that's just something that I don't think our residents have the capacity.
And that's what I was suggesting you take that line off.
Oh, I thought you said just remove the last.
Oh, you know what? I didn't realize there were 2 sentences. I thought it was 1 sentence.
Okay.
No,
Delete the last 2 sentences in
4.
4.
And it appears to be just 1 sentence, given the expansive list.
Okay,
Taking that one off of there, it's not really.
For those first 2 sentences in 5, is there even something that's instead of potential simply existing law covers responsible parties, blah, blah, blah. And just citing the existing source?
Yeah.
Law.
There's no action step. So
Yeah, they should be
recommendation.
You could say those are public-private partnerships, not just number 4 should be considered to fund remediation efforts as provided for in current law.
So
So
that
you're still saying they should be considered.
To your point, Kurt, I agree. It's not a recommendation so much as noting existing law covers it. In other words, that's elsewhere in the report, for example, right? Noting in the report existing law covers responsible parties, et cetera. So it's not part of the recommendations per se. That's part of existing capacity and existing. The recommendations are we're going to need a new revenue source. We have to piece together state and federal, et cetera.
There's existing law, then there's how we implement it. This is one example. In not every case, the laws there, we didn't pursue them for reasons. In other cases, we do pursue them. So it expresses both ways.
Yeah, and I think I just have to see it. Does that mean this is directing the agency to take superfund action?
I would not prefer that necessarily.
That's kind of what
Right.
it looks like.
Okay.
And so that's where I'm
That's not
just,
my intent.
yeah,
Yeah,
and that's where I'm just, the more you focus on responsible parties in a sense, the more that really means you're going through.
And that's why, to me, I think the 1, 2, 3, and 6 really encompass the discussion, and 4 and 5 tend to make it, I think, a little less clear, a little more blurry, and doesn't give that guidance to the legislature.
We're concerned, well, moving forward. So concerned about having them cause you to pursue super. So what's the solution?
I think
issues.
it depends on what's left. Four kind of talks about some type of partnership piece, more like the PRI, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. That type of structure versus if we just have the potential responsible parties. I think that first on 5, the first 2 sentences there are kind of explaining why you would create a fee on waste disposal. It's because everyone, it's the more the justification. So think of it flipped maybe. If you flipped it, fee should be assessed on all waste disposal to cover remediation expenses for Pig's Eye. That's like other folks, for other places to get rid of dumps. Given the expense of potential responsible parties for Pig's Eye dump would come most waste generators was operating, and this would include. I think that's what it's somewhat trying to create the same situation as the closed landfill program, a justification. Closed landfill started out and it's by a solid waste generation fee, which is now rolled into the solid waste management tax. And so part of the solid waste management tax is create that linear back is for the closed landfill program. It doesn't have to be. I'm just, as you start pulling out some of those other pieces where it specifically talks about partnerships, in-kind contributions, and more just talk about responsible parties, that leans more towards Superfund versus what I think these are more written as. They had some roles, but here's a different way to have them involved in the traditional Superfund.
They've got, talk about we need a new funding source. 5 is kind of justification.
Could be read that way.
That's, I like that. I don't want to go this super fun route. Get this stuff.
So I mean, number 5 is saying, can't go after, doesn't make sense to go after PRP. Right. Is that something that seems something we could probably work.
Everyone's on RP, so everybody should think.
Yeah.
Trying to use super fun. Find the RPs. What reason your program exists? What? Maybe 4 is the problem.
Task force should do more than just say, existing vehicles. Then what we should come up with. And this is out of my wheelhouse, but I like number 5 philosophically. The complexity of number 4 really gets into a whole lot of that might be just as problematic. Establishing your taxes, whatever those roles are, understanding or whatever it takes, sounds like it would further complicate things. It might be a good idea to include if there's value, motivation from public or private organization, but I don't know if that's taking it out, what risk does it add to the outcome? The main point.
What if it makes sense to focus on 5 first and see where we land?
And it just sounds like that's where the heavy lifting could come from. I might be told. Few organizations, no matter how deep their pockets are, it's different than spreading the cost over a large amount of time. You'd have to tell me
reword number 5. Kind of what I'm hearing you say is we need number 4. But the way 5 is written right now is, yeah, there's really not a recommendation has to come and you can say why, but I just don't understand number 5, to be honest with you. Because it's like, okay, given the recommendation is given the expansive list of potential responsible parties, a fee should be assessed on all waste disposal to cover the remediation. On all waste, I mean, is that everything that's in there now? What kind of fee are you talking about? Because there's no new waste going in there, so.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. One way that could be done, and there are a couple of them, I don't want to get into two details here to blur it even more, is Melcat right now is funded by waste going into existing landfills that are in the 7 county metro area. You could do something like that. There are some limitations there because we know metro waste goes to Elk River, out of state. You could change that a little bit more so it's a little bit more broad base, but the idea is for a good part of those who send waste to the dump, they're sending waste still. So if it's a company or waste hauler, that company or waste hauler is still creating waste, sending it to existing landfill. Or the company that purchased them out, or the public entity, or the private businesses, and that you would capture it that way. That's how the solid waste program was created. There was a waste generation fee that was assessed on all waste. And that says, it's not perfect, right? But that was then pulled together to help fund the effort. So you could do the same thing here. You could assess it on waste disposed in the metro area or Minnesota, or you could do a waste generation fee in the metro area, and then have that dedicated to this purpose.
So it is on, it doesn't have anything to do with the waste that's in Pigside.
Correct.
It has everything to do with, you did it before, you're doing it now, give us money. So,
It's not perfect.
No,
It's
no,
just-
I get it.
yeah.
but I did not, when I read that, I did not get that.
So hypothetically, we all pay an extra $1 for our dumpster at the end of our driveway. That's really what that's getting at.
And I think I'd be pretty direct about it. I mean, as far as a recommendation.
Or direct be the Superfund process, special project process should not be. That would be very direct. Instead, there should be created to.
Yeah.
And 4, if you're gonna put fees on other organizations, that in the end is passed through to the end users anyway. You cut it. You're gonna say this organization's gonna, and maybe they will. I wouldn't want to include that if that has to be part of the ultimate solution, applying with the current laws, because we're saying we're recommending that. But all those costs end up on homeowners, businesses at the end. And we're 5 gets directly to that society.
You'd have to be making the case in the rest of our report of why it is a societal thing to be cleaning up then as well, right? If we're going to be pushing for that type of creation. It needs to not come out of nowhere. It needs to know like that, what we've all been contributing, why the task force recommended this stuff. I like having a more focused thing for the legislature to try to tackle. I'm recognizing that as the task force putting this out there, then that's going to then go through all the legislation talks and everything, how it goes. If we can give a general direction of why that be more helpful, I think, to them trying to create some action as opposed to, again, the general, here's some federal funds to chase and that kind of thing. Whether or not they willingly want to pick this up with it, I don't know what the political backing in that state would be. There's a risk with it, but if we're going to be pushing forward for new funding, we gotta start somewhere and having a more concrete idea on how to go about that. Is it a better chance?
I know there are folks here who have different organizations, different pieces. Just a reminder, we will come back to this. So hearing from a few folks, the idea of the recommendation that would hit maybe who they represent or that probably needs more consideration. So we could start drafting this way and then decide later whether for sure it's in. Very conscious of that, especially for those who work for elected organizations, counties and cities. We could work on more of this, and then the final call isn't today. The final call is the next meeting. That helps folks. We can further define.
I think I'd be interested in seeing what the wordsmithing of it would be, right? What a draft would be and looking at that for consideration.
And I think it's still not saying this is the only thing to pursue as well, right? We're focusing on this part right now, but not losing some of number 3 up there as well, as well as what are the existing funds. Like that should all still make sure that it makes it into this funding discussion, but that we actually, as a task force, have a concrete issue, new idea to.
I think, waiting for what it looks like based on this discussion. But I do think it's important that because we've got a lot of, even number 1, it's not a funding recommendation, it's a statement. Everything beyond that, it would be recommendations on how to do that. So it's, I think that it just needs to be reformatted and reworded. I like the statement, no one funding source statement. And I know that we changed so that it's specific to Big Side Down. But I think they need to be recommendations rather than just an explanation of what.
That's a really good point. It's to make these actionable as well. If we could do that, for instance, instead of be required, so a combination of existing funding sources and new funding sources should be pursued. If that's the action versus.
Yes.
Okay.
So to make them each action items, because right now they're really not. But you're getting the concept down here, but they need to be turned into action. Okay, then that makes it a recommendation.
Yeah, but ultimately, I think your point was, we wouldn't be in this pickle if we recognize certain reality that there want to be out of it, all that. I think Jenny Francis had a comment in chat too that I couldn't read.
Yes, it says, one was a task force like this last been assembled. Would it be wise for this committee to suggest modern landfills be explored to allow future cleanup on sites?
The first one, I don't think there's been one on the Pigs Act. I'm just trying to think of other task force. The landfill program wasn't really a task force recommendation. That was legislative process, agency, and various parties. So anything, we'll look at all the folks from MPCA, anything else that would.
Weren't there recommendations in the past on Big Side?
By the agency as a report that we've done, but never through a task force. It was more high level feasibility. Here are some options, I'd say, not recommendations.
Didn't include funding options though, it was only cleanup. So make it more actionable. We're combining 1 and 2. Let's just run through this quick. 3.
Should be pursued.
I should have pursued.
Then just the next sentence is not including the recommendation, but kind of, each one of these will probably have a paragraph that kind of describe a little bit more, I think. That was mentioned earlier on this, maybe the justification then slide that next sentence down into the specification or how, or where we're focused? Thinking of.
That's the L'Oreal.
Well, let me, sorry to just move on this a little bit more. Federal funding should be pursued. Really sounds more like, okay, go for brownfields or super fund existing funding. Just like we're thinking of creating, proposing some other new funding source on the state level for waste generation. Would it be maybe different here is that maybe it should be adjustments to the MRI, creation of a structure similar to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative should be pursued, or instead of our recommended.
Is there a new federal funding source pursued?
Could you go back up to number 1? Because I don't think it's probably used. I think it should be specific to pig side. Funding, federal funding. That could be federal funding, it could be a new funding sources or existing funding sources. That's similar language to that is specific to federal funding. Because I think, yeah, I mean, federal funding should be pursued from the anything. But
I know there's some existing federal sources, but I mean, I think we've all determined that's not really going to get us where we need to be, right? So I mean, we can acknowledge that, but then I think we need to focus on something new has to be created beyond what is. I mean, I think this group agrees, like, with the laws we have, we will do what we can do, but we know that it's not going to solve the problem, right?
Well, a new source for pigs eye would be pursuing the MRRI, right? And that needs some reworking in order for pigs eye to be included. You know that there is at least some support to attempt that, right? And that is also another concrete-ish new thing that we can suggest to put into the report as well, that is beyond that. Just go after the federal funds up there and relying on the legislature to kind of decide they want to take it up and go their own direction. Like giving some of these specifics is good in the recommendation.
And I think maybe even further clarifying adjustments to ensure pig size and eligible.
Yes.
Right, like just making that crystal clear, like new sources are adjusting existing sources so that pig size and eligible.
I mean, I'd love to have it be very focused on pig eye, but I think we all know it legislatively, in order to necessarily get everyone in buy-in, it may end up being programs that cover wider than that
Yeah.
specific area, right? But
And if we just say pig size and eligible use, then that encompasses that, right? So
Yeah,
if
hopefully
they
it's-
broaden it, our
Yeah.
focus is as long as pig size and.
hopefully it's first in line.
I think that's what we.
So-
Right, it should be first in line, and here's our report why.
I was saying there's federal level and state level without existing funding is not adequate. New funding is needed on the federal and the state level. Is that what we're saying?
And I think they should be separate recommendations.
Separate recommendations.
And I don't want to lose if you've got ideas, this adjusting MRI
Yeah.
and the Great Lakes Restoration is.
Examples or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I know none of us want to sign our organizations up for something, but there are ideas and we can lob them as examples. Legislature can do what they would like with that, right? But giving them nothing, I think, will be problematic.
Kurt Jordan said that. We can't just say we need.
From our understanding from Congressman McCollum's office is right in line item for make that. It has to have a tie to a program existing or new. And first analysis as mentioned, I think existing don't quite work. and it would have to be.
Would this cover what she's communicated in terms of, adjusting these specific months to make fixed and multiple source? Would that give her what she needs to be able to go federally and try and do that work?
Because then she could ask her staff, why would this need to be adjusted, right? What does the bill currently say? Well, what wordsmithing would we need to do that bill to allow it to happen? And I think it has to do with, this is not unique, but for the federal government, most of the time they want to work on a clean site. The site would be mediated, right? So it would have to change that language to allow work on the site given its current circumstances, and it's not remediated.
But I think we all want to make sure our office and all of our federal partners have the tools they need out of this report to go make those changes.
In our early conversations with them, they're very interested in exploring these ideas. MIII is more kind of a non-point source, like a Chesapeake Bay type piece, which would not include this industrial source. And the GLRI is more industrial source type program that, at least as we're familiar with it for cleanup. It has natural resources benefits too, but what needs to be done, we could put this in the comments as examples or ways. These are possible ways to do it, and leave that in a paragraph below the recommendation.
Helpful also if we could get, since you're in contact with anyway, that we could, when we come back and look at this, that we could get their take on it. Or maybe they have ideas on how to tweak something because they know how this system works and they don't.
They need to tell us what we need to tell them.
Right. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
I use that.
Okay, we'll make adjustments. What we're laying with for. An example. Talked about like recommendations and then examples. That kind of structure is what I assume people were leaning towards. This is one example.
Or feels a little more on that broader examples again that may not necessarily be as far as the example.
Not actionable, is that what you're saying?
Feels easier to read that and be like, okay, that's other
That's Ramsey's and St.
areas
Paul's
to deal with.
responsibilities.
So,
I think we can get rid of it.
but
Also to delete number 4 completely.
Does it nest in under broader program? You described the GLI or something around the Great Lakes where partners came to the table. That program. I don't know what that meant, but
Yeah. For GLRI, it tends to be responsible parties. They share for you different veto local part. That's how that was done. Because the federal dollars weren't all there. But there are other options too is city, Met Council, county all have as part of their planning, and that would there be funding through existing sources or new appropriations to help achieve things. That's where the in kind or other types of things. It's a little different than the RP like partner mission and all that.
So are we saying then? We started, Colin, that we take out 4 and 5?
those are, I mean, it sounds like people want, and this is an investment, park systems, and we're all aligned. That could happen anyway, and you wouldn't want to include it. But I don't know how you incentivize it or say that's, we think that should happen. That sounds like unless you force people to the table, which is trying to see, like, if someone asks, what do you mean there? How does that?
Going back to the, okay, so 4 and 5, by the way, the one that's in there in the middle there, it's a no-go. For the solid waste management funds,
Number 4,
that part. I would not like to see that included in our recommendations. So I think, again, if we're talking about, these are recommendations, these are not just statements of why. We can have examples, we can do that. But if we're not, we're saying that we don't believe that if we do believe that 4 and 5 are already covered under existing law, we don't need to put it in there. We're probably not going to pursue it. And I'm going back on the opposite of what I said to begin with, is that we don't need to. Because if they're not really the recommendation that we're making, that's what I thought I heard you say, that we're really not making those recommendations. We don't want to do. We don't want to try to figure out who all the partners are. We want to have this new fund that says, this is how we're going to fund this.
That's what number 5 is trying to do, but we're not saying it clearly.
I thought that's what number 1 said.
Let's get more of being kind of a how here.
And number 1 could just be, honestly, it could be since no one funding source is available, so that it doesn't go to, so since one funding source is able, since no one funding source is able to provide the needed funding for environmental remediation of Pigside Dump, a combination of various existing funding sources and new funding sources should be pursued.
I think 5 could be rewritten, but the goal is to say, okay, everybody's responsible. Right?
Okay.
So we're not going to pursue a system that causes everybody to contribute. And that could be through the solid waste. I'm have your same concern about solid waste tax. Maybe it could be in addition to the solid waste tax. Version of the solid waste system always that.
And it's already covered. We didn't call out all the other potential funding sources that exist. I call out this. Because we are saying that you could use existing or.
So should this not be in the recommend? Calling it a recommendation might be strong, right? But I mean, I assume in this report, we're going to have a bunch of stuff about existing things. Is this just another existing thing that helps the legislature look at? Hey, here's a bunch of things. Can we modify any of these things? Can we adjust them? Can we raise taxes? Can we lower taxes? If 5% is going here, should 2 of it go there? You know what I mean? And maybe not, again, recommend it. It's really, I don't know if that's our place, but we got to give them some, I think, something to start with and look at and play with, right? And that's their job to be playing with it.
Did you have something further down, already started on number 5? Yeah, I mean, there. The super fund responsible.
This would be like paint care, but dump care fee essentially, for lack of a better analogy, where an industry that large has now come around to take responsibility, but in a more, I mean, that was compelled through legislation, the paint care fee, but so too would a
There's
fee
no
on-
manufacturers of trash.
Right, so it's a science fee,
Yeah,
but
society.
the idea that it's a dedicated standalone fee, I think that's the question at hand here. And then I guess that sort of what was talked about earlier from is this problem with dumps. I know within the scope, we want to focus on Pigside. It should be the priority for any dump fund, but is there a need for a dump care fund? Is what I'm kind of hearing that their Millcat has one purpose, but that doesn't necessarily cover all the need for dumps.
Just don't want to lose the rationale for part of it, you know?
Rationale.
Yeah, on five, first part of five, why?
Yes.
And I think that's important. And I would get rid of potential responsible parties for fixing dump.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's more, we're in a potential responsible party phase,
I
and specifically locked down, so I think that's just
I
we'll work on it.
But we're not pursuing.
So I want to make sure if there's anything in four that you guys were really after that we're not picking up, maybe when you're drafting this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think four could be seen as an in-between of the traditional super fund, name a responsible parties, they then proportion it amongst themselves. And instead, there are other entities in the area that could play roles in other ways. So it's kind of in between a five and a pure super fund process. And then we've also heard from some conversations focusing, there are other ways for folks that may be responsible parties that are more public entities that have public goals in the same area to contribute, but not be necessarily tagged as a responsible party or a liability to a responsible. And so it's trying to capture that in between model.
That second to last sentence. Okay, it's good one.
Yeah.
Too explicit.
Yeah.
No, and I think those last two sentences need to be gone.
Can we delete those?
It's not a recommendation.
Number, what, just make
Number
sure we're
four.
at four.
Concept of public-private partnership is that I'm not clear on where folks are lying with that. Is this coming off the table? Or are people saying as an alternative to the formal super fund process, public-private partnership can be pursued?
If a partnership is value add to the organization, why would we take that off the table? I guess, I don't think we're running out of time to get this done. We're making some recommendations on things that have been missing that put us in the predicament. Something we don't know. If it moved to a next step in the legislature, there'd be a lot of conversations about how you would make something happen. But I don't think the intent of this document is to constrain that discussion. Those things can come in later. We should not eliminate something that would idea down the road. And maybe we'd want to make sure there's a bookmark for something that we think, or some of us think should be continued to be pursued. But just what is the recommendation? It's not a specification for the outcome that we want to make sure everything we said was checked off. We're just weighing in on some things we think are essential or helpful to getting to an outcome you succeed at.
Sounds like we're keeping it there as an option.
I think we soften it or whatever, but if it helps get it done, but obviously it's in a way that if it compels organizations to do something as part of the solution, that would be very difficult to get done. We probably should acknowledge that that's a smart thing to add, because then we're more barriers.
I'll just withdraw my highlighted idea there, given the feedback from other counties and all of the sentences. And then to Sam's point, I wonder if we could change that word considered to be something like invited or welcomed, or because I'm viewing it as an opportunity that shouldn't be rejected if there emerged some potential partner, but that not framing it in a active pursuits.
But like we're an opportunity. You could look at it this as trying to deal with a problem and here we are. Or you could say we're trying to seize the opportunity beneficial in many ways, and why would we continue to explore what that could be.
Is a voluntary piece versus think you said Pell, which would be
Voluntary public-private partnerships.
What you saying, that voluntary public-private partnership? Because invited, it's like, if I was one of those folks, I go, okay, fine, invite me. So I think.
By the way, man.
Explored.
Should be explored, yes.
Solid waste management.
Push secrets away.
This is forming up. We can make some changes. I'm feeling a little more clear about what to do. What if we should keep going?
Yeah.
6?
This is pointing to existing sources.
A lot of overlap here. Keep, discard, modify.
Look at 3
For
and
the
6 be
restoration.
combined.
This part maybe is more associated with restoration rather than remediation.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm reading. So for restoration
Oh,
portion of it, these are some sources that can be pursued. And some existing sources that we pointed out there we should go after existing and non-existing sources. That would be nice. Our recommendations also.
I think the nuance is most of our conversation has been remediation. Now we're talking.
I think this is, I don't know. Any of these first impression when they say what's for the, pigs eye dump will say not eligible. And I think that's where some nodding towards, hey, we think it does meet your goals, these programs, but it's, very unique to the restoration. A little bit of push, a little bit of putting them on notice that maybe acceptable.
Keeping our restoration only recommendation. Make changes. Clear. Is it actionable?
I think it's in the report, we'll need to maybe separate it, like here are the remediation discussion recommendations and probably a short discussion. So just so the wires don't get crossed, I guess.
And I would have these specific things in there. Without those specifics, then it doesn't mean as much, like the LCC or whatever else. And if you're able to give any more detail on one of those as an example, how it could be pursued and why maybe it hasn't passed, right? 'Cause that's another reason we're here is because the big light has not fit in neatly into any.
And the core, I'll speak for us, like we have restoration programs, definitely. One of those, I mean, the majority of those though are with that underlying assumption that the site is clean and it has been remediated, right? So if we can achieve that goal, right, that opens up a door for other.
some way that we can start that recommendation stating for restoration efforts. Because I didn't catch that until 7. Oh, yeah, that's right, that's different. Funding, federal sue other.
Yeah, I like that.
So Hans, if you need a couple.
Such as, and I think I would do the such as.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you,
But yes,
Jen.
Nathan said they paid for
Once the lawyers are okay with the site.
We come to the end of the funding discussion. Is there more work to do to make changes?
Just making sure that they're all worded so that they are action items from the beginning.
Actionable.
Yes. And if you have explanation that you feel is necessary, that would come after an explanation. the actual action.
Yeah, I could see something in bold per sentence in that gives
Yeah.
the recommendation and something, it describes it a little more detail underneath.
Mediation.
Want to talk through the new ones?
New ones. Yeah, the new ones. We added, based on earlier discussion during the break, we added two new concepts. Dig and haul or dig and liner implemented safety protocols should be strictly followed during excavation to protect nearby communities and construction workers from potential risk. Got it? Okay. If dig and haul is implemented, waste will not be treated on site. Hazardous materials will be segregated and all waste sent to appropriate facilities for safe containment.
For the first one, you have just during excavation, also include transport.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
Kind of the whole.
Yeah, we intend the whole process. One of those has, I mean, they both will have some.
So on the second one, some people consider dewatering as treating. Some of this is going to be very bad. I feel all it until it's. So you don't want to say that I'll soften my waste off either.
Okay.
Treatment to address contamination. Not gonna happen.
Not treating. I'll say it, but dewater.
Sounds like we got close. We'll make other adjustments as we move forward. Going. Distance of large volume of uncontained waste directly adjacent to Battle Creek things that leads to risk to the environment. Waste should not remain in places.
I don't know if this fits in, but I would say that we might want to talk about Big Guy is the largest contained waste dump in Minnesota. That might be worth
Yes.
pointing out as that's why. I think why to go along with this statement. And you've also just adjacent to Boundary, Side Lake, that's true. We also probably want to stay within the floodplain that's in the river.
Floodplain Mississippi River. And really tell the story. There's a whole contamination story here that is really important.
Yeah.
It needs to be told.
I would say this is a high level recommendation. So I use that here. But I think, yeah, if you could, I like how you're writing it right now.
Yeah, modifier isn't right there. Pig's Eye dump is the largest volume of uncontained waste directly adjacent to. No, it's the largest uncontained
Minnesota.
waste in Minnesota and is
Which
located
is-
next to.
We may need to play with some of these words.
Yes, I wanted to make sure.
What size is freeway compared?
Depends on how you count it. It's unpermitted. Those largest unpermitted dump.
We need just dump, landfill, those type of words.
Yeah.
Well, we can massage it a little bit, but I mean, this is a huge deal.
You don't want them going up.
So I think some of that we'll just need to play with because I'm just trying to think of other online areas of other landfills too that may have a permit.
If you have a permit, that's different.
Yeah, so we'll see how we can make sure it's factual. And there may be some terms in there that have to be added.
Tell the contamination story.
So,
Fine.
Big.
Should keep going.
I'm not sure anybody knows something.
And so that would exist. No matter what you do, please don't end a sentence with is. However you reword it.
I call when you. Hanging words.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let's get that in English.
I just too, I mean, that's why I'm curious.
but the concept of that second sentence up there, the practical effect is then cover in place without addressing the underlying unlined areas underneath or The other one, which was select remediation of sites, would be off the table. I just want to be very clear what that statement would.
Just has to move.
So either dig a hall or dig a line.
So move to a number that's on the site, but segregated.
We would have to disturb the existing trash in some way to solve this problem.
Yep. Saying.
So it may not leave the exact, number one, or it may leave the exact, but it will be.
It can't stay as it is today.
I think it's part of
Okay.
both of them.
Okay.
Okay, keep going. Number 2, remediation restoration efforts should focus on options that best prioritize protectiveness of local communities, wildlife, and natural habitat, and improve water quality while remaining feasible and financially achievable. Is it actionable?
Focus on it. It should in there.
It should.
You could just, you could say should prioritize,
I was thinking.
get rid of the focus on options.
Just delete the words between should and priority.
Prioritize options that best.
But I would just, you could delete the options that best prioritize.
You could even take out prioritize, and just say protect.
Yeah.
Remediation and restoration efforts should protect local communities, wildlife, water quality in a feasible and financially way. Victoria left. He was not gonna-
Any other changes to this one? We'll look at it again before we send it out to you. Number 3. Remediation restoration action should be consistent with existing planning work, including the city of St. Paul River passage.
Our expert with that is not here, but do we feel like this might be in conflict with that based on what we've said at all?
It's one of our, as we looked at this, the digging line in place, would that be consistent? I think one of our big pieces is that, as best possible, and it really focuses more on the restoration. But there's maybe no getting around that we have to put a landfill there. We just don't want this to mean that it takes digging the line out. Whether that is having more conversations with the city of St. Paul to know that, or tweak it to say, it should be as consistent as possible, but without taking off.
Yeah, it should kind of, it's that conversation.
Consistent as possible without excluding any of the options the task force is considering.
Yeah, that's an important thing.
Well, is it has considered or is recommended?
It's recommended.
It's recommended.
Yeah.
I don't think this has to be in there, but we're working on a 30-year facility plan. And there'll be future plans beyond that. And council's plans, whatever they are, including parks and so on. And then those should be considered as this compatibility.
What, is that kind of part of number 9?
It is, but if we're talking about making sure plans are along the process, and I don't know that we are, I think we're just making sure that it's specific to that site. Our plans would what happens until it affects whatever that happens, affects other things like with the height in an airport. We'd want to be a little more explicit about organizations that have legitimate approved plan that could be amended. Our plan would be an MCA approved for that site. And it could also be that there's transportation plans, railroads or whatever. I'm not saying it needs to be added, but if you think about there.
Got specific plans called out. You're saying there may be others we haven't considered. Yeah, placeholder for that.
It could just say and others.
This is for,
These just specifically
this is for number 3, right?
Yeah.
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 9 is related.
It's related, but not, that's more of a.
Other relevant plans.
Intentional, but sometimes the plan, we're bound to it. Hard to undo. So. Dude, that's what us plans do in our own. Some become capital improvement.
I guess, hear that. There's solid waste plans, I think, under approval that,
That's approved too late now, Kurt.
At number 4. Address aviation concerns related to the St. Cloud downtown airport.
That probably goes without saying.
But we want to say it anyway.
For sure, we won't get a permit without it.
I think the bigger thing here would be, there are regulatory constraints around site as well. Several.
Maybe this is a need instead of should, it needs.
Would the words be?
there's a difference between meeting regulatory requirements and addressing concern.
How about requirements?
Well, but we might want to go more than just the, you're saying,
No.
more than just the requirements.
Just saying there's a distinction.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know what the position, what the different wording would make a difference.
I'm not
How
sure.
about if you put in addresses aviation regulations and concerns? That way you got it covered.
There are specific asks for this or specific wording from the MAC.
Specific wording, but this concept, I think we're all like guidance important.
And it's probably a minimum requirement, but like when we dealt with FAA and everybody on the Islands project, I mean, birds and bird strikes are their primary concern, right? So going beyond the minimum requirement may be that we're gonna restore the habitat in a way that isn't gonna try to attract the things that they don't want to attract.
You don't want to build a rookery.
Ideally, we'll probably won't get a permit if we build that, but I'm trying to do it in such a way that we're minimizing.
Okay, got regulations and concerns. There's a greater priority on long-term environmental protection over achieving the lowest possible cost.
While recognizing that cost is a big issue still. I don't know. I don't want to minimize that we are not considering cost. Overall, that's not what I, what I think.
Well, and I mean, we can leave it there, but at the same time, that was one of our guiding principles. It wasn't in our recommendations, was that we weren't going to go with the lowest possible cost. Is that an actual recommendation? Or was it just what we used when we were coming up with our recommendations?
Saying delete, it can be deleted.
I think it can be because that's how we came up with them. I think we need to-
Okay, proposal to delete it.
I think this, in practice, what we heard from folks is, I mean, just selective addressing hotspots or just putting a cover on wasn't acceptable. And I think we've done that by one, and I think we're gonna say that later on number 6. It gets rid of those, and then, as you were saying, number 2 says, well, we're feasible and financially achievable.
Could be combined with number 6, right, to explain number 6. That we took a long-term view, considering recommending options.
Okay.
I think 2 already covers it, like Kirk said. Doesn't it?
Yeah, and 6 with kind of calling out dig and haul and dig and liner, the preferred options that
Number 5.
But I assume number 5 in some manner will be part of the discussion in the report.
Yes.
As we go on with that concept will hopefully still be showing up.
Or we just all go home and spend no money.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, I guess my point is that it's not a recommendation as much as it is
That's not
the
very.
overall way we
that's
came up with the recommendations, which should be covered.
It's built into. Okay, great. The preferred, 6, the preferred remediation options are the dig and haul, the dig and line options. Probably say why. We should have words that say why, I imagine.
And the others,
You think
They're the most protective of the resources that are of the water resources of the site or and other resources.
because of these reasons? Make sure you put that in.
What if we combined 1 and 6?
On 1 and
Would
6.
you mind going back? I know this is the worst job is doing online editing. I've done this, I know it's not, it's a thankless stuff. But if we just say, existence of large volume uncontaminated waste directly adjacent to the is a risk to the environment. The preferred remedial options are dig and haul. And then that, to your point, explains why it is.
I like that.
Right?
We kept you on for a reason, Kirk.
A lot of legislative.
Well, and it's a really strong, it's a really strong statement. As our first recommendations, everything else tied into that.
Yes, it does. Okay. There's a, yeah,
Jimmy Francis, you just said that dig and haul is the best for our future water protection.
all best for future water protection.
Work that in a sentence as a number 1.
I would argue though that it would only be better if the MPC does not build a landfill, because you build a landfill. Modern landfill isn't. So I would say dig and haul is not more protective than dig and line. Groundwater.
I think it's saying both of those compared
It
to
is.
the other option.
But he just said the dig and haul.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that, Devon.
Can you say it to me? Yeah.
Yes, he said that dig and haul is best for our future water protection.
And I would say both.
We'd argue both are protected for water.
Yes, he also says.
Okay.
It sent, looks like sent another message.
He was.
Yeah, that
conserving
was
both.
when he mentioned both.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
it's both Dig and Landing.
All right, good. Seven.
The way site to existing metro landfills would greatly impact the remaining waste capacity for the metro area. Dig and Haul has implemented the final disposal location should not be existing metro area landfill.
Are you looking at me? But I kind of support that statement.
Dave, I think this is where you're gonna have to take back everything nice you just said about it. Yeah, I think we would have that second sentence creates logistical problems for some of the other pieces. Fully understand the concept that we shouldn't be necessarily exporting the problem elsewhere, and it creates those ramifications. I think the agency would say that's one of the reasons why digging the line is more attractive. But at heart, and if the interest of the community is digging Hall, really then puts us into greater Minnesota, which I think would want that same statement. And then it goes to the idea of financially achievable. So I understand the sediment, but that action statement has repercussions, and I think greater Minnesota would really like to add them to it.
What are we saying though, if you're gonna dig in Hall, it's going, might only moving out of state.
Well, I mean, so Claire could be close.
With enough money, right, anything's feasible.
Well, is part of the current estimate assuming that that option is falling out of state, or was the estimate for the dig and haul not including any type of waste transport?
Transport, but I don't think it had a specific disposal locations identified at this very high early stage of estimating.
Okay, so it did include some what parameters went in that part of the estimate? Was it assuming transportation in state or out of state just in general, or just here's a
Like, here's a
good number, we
Yeah.
think? but-
That's what it was.
State number.
Yes.
So are you saying that we need to say that it's adding greater risk, or we need to get rid of that statement?
I think it would be better just get rid of this second statement. And then I understand that it doesn't create an action. I think it's just information. Yeah.
But I think I would like to, I understand why you want to, but I was surprised to see it. And that specifically.
Well, we didn't judge any of these before. We put everything in.
Yeah. But I would hate to remove that would impact the past and that's back to state. So.
That's good information.
That is good. So basically, maybe we should say is excavate consideration of the impact to the metro waste capacity should be
Factor.
something like that. So it's an action item.
In deciding between dig and haul and dig and line.
Yeah. So yeah.
Should be a decision criteria.
Right, you know what I'm saying? Is that we need to consider the impact of metro waste capacity in evaluating the difference between dig and haul and dig and line.
Can be further evaluated in the feasibility study.
Feasibility study just got bigger, but yeah, that is important.
Sure you have enough money?
I mean, I think, I look at the numbers of the dig and haul, a couple $100 million difference. Is there 8 million yards there? I don't know how much is there. That's not right. It's about 8 million tons. Well, the $65 a ton was activity. That's $500 million just for the disposal. That's a lot more than 200 million difference. That doesn't get the haul.
I guess the way this is written right now is it should be considered a dig and haul and dig and line. But if it is dig and haul, saying greatly impact the remaining waste capacity is putting it mildly, isn't it? But you exhausted.
Well, it wouldn't exhaust it, but it would get to, yeah, it was 20, Burnsville Center, and then it's got a 23 million yard expansion. So, I mean, that's not, they could handle it. I don't know if they
Okay,
would sell you
so-
the airspace, that's a different story. I'm not waste management, I don't know if they'd be interested in selling this stuff there at all. I just know they have the capacity. Technically, I mean, you do a 10-year permit, so you don't give it to them all at once. Right? So technically have all. You permitted the airspace.
When you add just the sentence that's there now, impact to metro area capacity, waste capacity would be considered. Doesn't that basically say that that's where your neighborhood that it would go?
Close.
Because when you're saying, say it's considered, it's not just considered between dig and haul and dig and line. So if they decide on, so the way it's written right now is the recommendation is that you should look at dig and line.
What's basically saying,
That's what it's saying. And I don't think that's what you meant. Or do you?
Yeah, well, dig and line is the one I support. Because of the negative impact on the waste shift. Because I think that the cost to move it, say, to Cedar Mills, Iowa, right, which is the easiest out of state landfill to get to. The haul would be crazy. Okay.
But suppose they choose dig and haul.
Right.
Dig and haul, then
Don't ignore the fact that it's going to have a negative impact.
okay.
But
That's
take
strong
that into
enough for you.
consideration. Well,
Okay.
Whereas the task force, because of various considerations, want to take a position between dig and line, dig and haul, or send it to the legislature and make sure that they consider these things. I mean, I think those are the two options. And I know this is tricky, having, Dave and I are facing this in another community, the same piece, where the community is very interested in preserving both options. Get to the legislature, and then they will ultimately decide, possibly for the reasons you said, or the financially achievable. Because I think we have that qualifier already too up here, feasible and financial achievable, and this is another thing that they need. We as a task force strongly want them to consider when making that.
So we have the option of forwarding both dig and haul and dig and line. Okay.
I mean, I know
that makes sense.
I know there's a lot of the community that want to dig it all. I completely understand it. I don't even disagree. Right? I know why they want it. But just, we need to recognize that it's going to have a negative impact on others outside that area. But let's not ignore that.
I agree totally.
Yeah.
we're deleting the last half of the last sentence.
I think it's more the new idea number 2 that Kara's drafted.
Reform the whole thing with a new idea.
Is considered strong enough, or should that word be something like mitigated, or?
We
I
get
just-
it.
Consider it.
Considered,
I think it's-
yeah.
Anything more on this one?
Wonder, do we need the financial component of that? So if it went to a landfill, the county currently gets a lot of host fees. Is the state going to pay those host fees? Or are they going to say, your county's a political subdivision of the state?
I'm trying to nuance all the various fees. As an agency, we have made the statement that waste already to another landfill would not have to pay this. Shoot, I have to go back and see that. It's more about, it wouldn't come towards CON. I'd have to look and see if that would trigger the Melcat fee and those out. I don't know about the host. Well, that's outside the state, unless the state specifically prevented it.
Right. And then, you know, that's a concern. I mean, this is not a minor amount of money. Because this airspace is only gonna be filled once. It can't be mitigated without another landfill, right? Because it's,
But
yeah, and so my back of the envelope calculation is about $100 million for the host airspace. But when you see it got filled with this and we didn't get any money on that, that's $100 million Dakota County would never collect, ever.
What about instead we say impact to metro area waste capacity and potential loss of local community host fees?
Yeah, I like that. I think that would.
But just on your bottom one, Kara, sorry.
You sure you want to put that in?
I'm just, that would be one way to do it. I'm not saying that. I'm
Why
just-
wouldn't we want to? I mean, and this is just the Barnesville. And the impact on Barnesville.
I would also be in favor of something like potential impacts to local receiving community or something, because it could be broader than financial. I mean, what we've talked about sending our trash somewhere else is a thing too.
Yes. I don't know that you want to call out that, hey, we don't want to lose host fees. I like the way he said it, so that it's not quite so.
Revenues. Potential loss of revenue is one of the biggest issues.
Switch it to revenue.
Yes.
Instead of host fees, just revenue.
Yeah.
I would hate to completely get rid of that. I was going to be adding that if you had, talking about it if you hadn't brought it up, thank you.
Could it be cost to the receiving community? As a more general statement. Impact my voice area.
Well, the people who read this understand what we're talking about. It's
Right.
engineering, right?
I suppose loss of a revenue is a cost, but that's pretty subtle when you, I would just assume include the loss of revenue.
Right.
Yeah.
The other costs.
Well, so impact of the
Cost of
Very
property.
nasty.
Right.
I don't know, this seems to be. You know what, I'm not gonna argue with it because I think that if it's gonna be a hot button for the legislature.
Yeah,
So you-
$100 million is a hot button to our commissioners too.
Okay, I'm not saying that, I mean,
I,
but, I
I think some of this will get more, when we get down to the financing, just like we talked about, what the actual financing looks like. If we look at this at the state, ask for an exemption to pay to Melcat or the solid waste management tax for this, because basically the state's paying one account to another state account. That's a little different than the state paying to a local, but I think some of that minutia, you know, I'm not going to ask for a recommendation. The legislature waived solid waste management tax and Melcat tax wasn't taken all in here because it's a little too narrow, but I think there will be, the devils will be in the details as I think we all know.
wait a minute, but you just eliminated something.
Well, I initially added this change about
Yeah.
the host fees. But then I think there's two different, am I correct that there's two different discussions? One's about host fees, one's about more general potential community revenues. But either one or the other.
yeah, I would take out the host fees and add them.
Keep going.
But I get it. I
A future use besides should include a safe and accessible natural area for passive recreation such as walking trails and wildlife observation. Okay. Good.
I think that meets what we heard from the public, is they don't want more ballparks or tennis courts or pickleball courts. They want.
Safe access, all the train tracks.
And not like solar necessarily.
9, also about reuse, environmental cleanup and restoration plan should allow for future expansion of the metropolitan water resource recovery facility, the Pig's Eye wood recycling center, both facilities for public purpose and have an environmental benefit.
Is that the name of the recycling facility? The wood waste site?
The Pig's Eye Wood Recycling Center, I mean, we
Is
could
it
double
really?
check.
Okay.
If we could, if there's a different name to do it, we can use that.
Double check.
Okay, because I've never heard it called that.
You're right, I think it's just, you've got a technical name, I can't, try to think of what it
Yeah,
is,
but
but
I
we
don't-
call it St. Paul Cogen, but it's a subdivision.
Yeah.
There's some,
The fuel supplying branch is separate from
Yeah.
St. Paul Evergreen Energy
Yeah.
and St. Paul Cogen. And then, there's a third one that's the actual fuel supplier that is the Pig's Eye site.
double check.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that they've ever made themselves. So,
Sam, you need more specifics added.
Oh, do I ever? But I think this covers it.
Oh, okay.
Am I missing efficiency?
You're good
Well,
for
maybe
now.
the broader is good in this case.
need a which in there. W. Which both serve as. That kind of a which, W-H-I-C-H.
We've been using remediation and here we're saying.
Yeah, we can make that, but it should be remediation for consistency.
It should be remediation.
If this would get into the next one too with feasibility. And I think the conversation is fine. I don't know how detailed it has to be in there, but not just allow expansion, but mitigating impacts, the adverse impacts. Which, yeah, gets into the feasibility of it. We're gonna do that anyway, right? We make bad decisions. But I have to say, not suggesting it has to be in there. I think that goes back to my initial comment, feasibility or under 10 is that ultimately not just the feasibility of what you do with the material on the site, but whoever does that, it's the feasibility of the entire area. Package of things that are impacted. That I'm thinking, it's not just expansion. In 9, it's also the ongoing operation.
More clarity on what feasibility study is. Direction on what the scope should be.
I think the task force, speaking for it, adding my input to it, should ensure that not only is the remediation and restoration feasible in that study, but it also is compatible with already there and what is planned.
Feasibility study should look at.
Doesn't add risk or doesn't.
We're concerned about like,
That's the easy one to.
Example, right?
Yeah, right.
But if you're looking at any features that are built as part of the remediation project, right, don't have a negative impact on surrounding infrastructure, owners, whatever.
Yeah.
Kind of the engineering behind it, like if we build this, what are the potential issues that could result from that?
So this is more clarity on what the feasibility study is. oversight to address the waste, looks at remediation options, restoration impacts, and impact to existing facilities.
That would do it. But if I. And if, like, that's not my prescription, but if I can't fund that, we need to figure out.
George said it
Thanks.
can't be funded by.
So those things normally, you know, when feasibility study.
Can we talk about?
Yes.
Some public input?
Let's go, can we get through this first?
There's gonna be time for public input. Max.
See how much time we have today for it too, but you're right, there will be, this
I just
is,
wanted to make sure everybody understood, for us and the public, that this is not, this is the beginning.
yeah, there will be another review for, and then allowance for public comment as we get to the final. This is here.
Well, just so you know, there's public resentment about previous items.
Violation of both city and the county regulation.
Let's get this worked at the end because this is the last one.
Yeah. So we were saying feasibility study for to address the waste. If I was specific about that, we're saying that not the scope for this is the sediment, the groundwater, offsite sources, or do we leave it open?
I think we leave it open. I think that's more
Project
administrative for us to figure out.
Come to the end. Anything final comments? Got a lot done today. Plan on going forward. Time left, we do additional public comment.
Okay, let's see if there's feedback.
And the time left, let's open it up again for public comment. Yeah. Comments from people in the room.
Kiki Sonnen from St. Paul Bird Alliance and the Friends of Big Side. Number 2 on this section of the mediation. That phrase, while remediation and restoration should provide for the communities, the wildlife, habitats, improve water quality, quote, while remaining feasible and financially achievable. Now, that phrase had not been used at any of his previous stuff. Why is, as soon as the environment comes, anything that might hurt the environment is allowed to pass because it's otherwise it's not feasible or financially achievable. So that's bad news there. And number 4, the remediation and restoration options for the implementation for the aviation concerns. Why are the I'm opposed to that statement as well. And then number 9, the environmental cleanup restoration. We have to make a statement here that the Big's Eye Wood Chipper and the Waste Control Commission is serves serves a public purpose and has environmental benefits. Well, I'd like to see how that's proven out. The wood chipper is a waste of time and space. It's covered, it's been there for decades on public parkland, usurping it, and they get paid like $50 a month or something to the city for that land. They've got wood chips stacked 3 stories tall. Before they stopped wood chipping, they were receiving wood products from 122 communities around the state into Wisconsin. It wasn't a local operation. It was transporting diseased woods that were bringing in diseased insects into our urban forest. It should be regulated. It should be moved off. It should be put on an industrially zoned site, not public park. And so it's just, it's just whenever whenever the environment is at risk, we say, oh, well,
we can't do anything else because it's not economically financial. No, I don't buy that anymore.
On that one, on number 2, I do think that everything that we put into this has already referenced that, and to have it called out specifically for this one doesn't make any sense to me.
Financially achievable.
Pardon me?
You're proposing to delete that from number 2?
Yes, the last,
Doesn't necessarily need to be part of that.
just take while it ended at improved water quality. Take the rest of it.
Consensus on that?
Within the financial section.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about that anyway.
About financially.
That's a, yeah. So it's already there, but to call it out here does make it sound like it's about environmental quality. Thank you.
Yes. A little background. Why we're here. This area planned for parkland, all this area, all the surrounding, stuff where there's some industrial on it now, planned for, parkland. What has happened is that we polluted by us collectively, polluted the river so bad that the city turned away from the riverfront and moved the zoo from the river, and moved the baths, the public baths, all the, and stuff away from the river. And then the idea was, oh, well, we've got that, and there, that stinky river, there's the, ever carcasses of, from the slaughterhouse going in the water, the mats of sawdust and other to waste material in it. It was just god awful down there. But finally we've said, no, this is absolutely crazy. This should be our front yard. We should take the best care of this thing. And Digzai actually was at the lead of these efforts, both on federal and state efforts to get the critical area and the national park, because it was one of the most abused areas and one of the most valuable areas as far as habitat and stuff. So now you start talking about, well, geez, you know, we can't be cleaning up this area and take out, you know, where they're chipping up wood. I mean, that has a right to be there. It's a public use. Everything's a public use, you know. I mean, it is, you know. That's, and on top of it, the city and the county, and the Met Council is a slightly different provision, has legislation that says you cannot use parkland for uses that are not park purpose. That is on their property. That's parkland. And that wood chipper is on that site in violation of laws of the city of St. Paul. And on top of it, if they were to be on there, they should be providing compensation. The city would require any parkland with its use that they provide compensation to the value. They don't do that. The same organization, just so you know, has been talking internally about making it an employee-owned company. So that would, they haven't done it yet, but that would make it a private business on the parkland, hauling in this waste material onto our riverfront. There are also requirements as to what the impacts that to the habitat. One of the things that you should list in there amongst the uses for the lake park should be fishing also. That should be on that list of things. But we have so destroyed it, you can't eat that fish that's in the lake. And this is a park, and you say, okay, this is a national park now. It's also has state designation as a state critical area, which is the highest designation that the state has. And you're saying, well, I don't know whether we should really clean it up to a point where you could actually eat the fish, or that it's a priority that you protect this habitat. You know, using it for storage of wood chips for this company to burn and add pollutant to their area. Oh, that's, I think you're way afield of what you were given as what you were asked to do is come back with a plan to restore there, plain and simply, to clean up and restore the area. And it's gone off all these other directions to serve, I don't know what the particular goals are, but I think you ought to get back on to how do you bring the best plan for bringing the habitat, restoring it as what is designated as a state, regional, and federal area of significance, natural resource significance. That is what should be coming out of this, not will this impact the industrial sites around the area. I apologize, but man, you lived in the city all my life, worked on these efforts, and the public keeps working and working and nudging it along. And then you get to things like this, where the public has very limited input. There isn't somebody who is a neighborhood representative here, other than us. And you're making up these things for things that you honestly don't know about. I mean, I don't mean that as an insult, but I mean, you haven't been in the meetings on this, the planning for this area, and the efforts that have gone to try and correct these sins of the past. And I hope you really get back on focusing on how can we turn this to the best situation possible.
Got 1 minute left,
I think there's online
Yes.
comments too.
Got 1 minute left. Any comments?
Jimmy Francis said that he had agreed, I believe, with what Ray had said. But Jimmy, unless you'd like to specify what you were saying, you were in agreement on.
The deleting of the last,
I believe that that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, the public comment there that why was that added to the environment? I'm supportive of both the public comments, thoughts behind behind our editing there. So know that I hear you.
any public comment from folks online, raise your hand. Let's wrap up for today. Been a great meeting, got a lot done.
Very, just fast question.
Yeah.
I noticed Bill hasn't been here at the last 2 meetings. Has he still been able to provide input on any of this?
We're in contact with the city of Newport. This is they're able to provide.
I'm good.
All right, thanks for the time today.